The magpies are already out scavenging after a long, cold night when the snowplough comes up the Hemsedal road at first light. Magpies are cautious, wily birds, not easily disturbed from the carcass of a fox which they found under the snow, and in late winter they are desperate for food. But they are opportunists, well adapted to man and his dwellings, and by contrast the willow grouse are shy, but from their feathered toes upwards they are superbly adapted to their natural environment. It's not difficult to see why they are called willow grouse. Unlike their British counterpart, the red grouse, they spend the winter in woodland and turn completely white. Now, in late March, the cockbirds are just beginning to molt to the browns of summer. They share this habitat with a few other species, like the willow tit. He feeds mostly on seeds, which the grouse can't reach, but that's what these agile little birds are specially adapted for. So what do the willow grouse feed on when the snow is almost too deep for dogs to manage, and when we must go on skis, and all ground-level food is buried 2 to 3 meters deep? Well, they take snow-level food instead. Birch buds. All the energy from last summer's sunshine locked up in a nutritious diet which the willow grouse crops so efficiently. It's a perfect adaptation to severe winter conditions and solves the first basic survival need of any species, food. The food supply can be increased by part felling some trees, making more buds available at snow level than on the standing trees. This could help the birds through a bad patch, but it's not really vital as there's never any real shortage of birch trees, even in the high valleys like Hemsedal at 900 meters above sea level. But there is another problem for the grouse, the weather. Temperatures can fall to minus 30 degrees centigrade when the real killer is the wind. After food, the second basic survival factor is shelter, especially when the blizzard sweeps up the valley, threatening death from exposure to all warm-blooded creatures, including man. Traditional wooden houses and huts, specifically designed for good insulation, have always provided man with the shelter he needs up in the mountains of central Norway. But where would we be nowadays without electric power? It's all made so easy. And we become so used to the convenience of modern standards that the housewife in her all-electric kitchen preparing a dish of fårikål for dinner forgets that outside there is a real life and death struggle for survival. Wrapped in our centrally heated cocoon of warmth, we do tend to take for granted those two basic ingredients of survival for all the wildlife out there in the cold, food and shelter. But on a night like this, shelter is going to be the crucial factor. Next day the storm has passed, and the fresh snow glistens in the morning sunshine. Already the ravens are heading for the mountains, seeking the victims of the storm as carrion. And we find the body mark where a willow grouse has landed in the new snow and gone looking for food. The footsteps are clear, with the telltale line of the hind claw in the snow. The tracks always lead to trees, some more than half buried. The grouse have been feeding at snow level, eating not just buds, but breaking off whole twigs. There's plenty of evidence of birds, but we see no birds themselves. Not surprising, really, for a species which is so widely hunted. Only their wing marks in the snow, showing where they vacated their snow holes this morning. So this is the answer to the problem of shelter, the snow hole or dock. Last night, each bird dug itself down and then sideways under a roof of snow with a peephole in the roof, and then this morning he climbed out to fly off, leaving the pattern of his wings behind him. And to prove that they spent the whole night there, we find at the bottom of each snow hole the droppings, which show how well the birds fed yesterday. What's more, willow grouse have a unique ability to conserve energy through the long winter night by lowering their body temperature and slowing down their whole metabolism. It's the first of many survival secrets of these shy, unapproachable birds, so hard to see, let alone study, in these winter landscapes. They proved so shy, in fact, that we had to go to 70 degrees north, to Tromsø, well inside the Arctic Circle, to study and film the birds in two places where they are not so afraid of man. And that's because there they are not shot or hunted. Tromsø is a bustling city of 50,000 people, on a small island surrounded by fjords and mountains. The town spreads over most of the island, but there's plenty of woodland, and there are grouse in all the suburbs, and especially round the airport. The opportunist magpies are there too, cheeky as ever. And many other birds too, like the delightful party of snow buntings we found near the radio station, cashing in on a crop of weed seeds, now uncovered by the melting snow of late April. The hens and young birds are beautifully patterned, but the most handsome by far are the mature cockbirds in their black and white livery. In the suburb of Hoppet is Rupeveien, or Grouse Street, and next to that Ørneveien, or Eagle Street. And just down the road, no, not an eagle, but a cock willow grouse. And here, so tame that he seems to be trying to demonstrate to us his tree climbing prowess. It's the end of April now, and at sea level here the snow is melting fast, making walking on the surface a little less certain than it was in the frosty air of the mountains. The effectiveness of their camouflage in spring can be quite dramatic. But more and more, the white plumage is becoming a liability as the snow recedes. And in places it becomes quite absurd. But the spring molt brings changes in behaviour too. After the communal life of winter flocks, the willow grouse now becomes strictly territorial. Simple actions like feeding and walking become ritualised, all seemingly part of an aggressive pattern based on noise, where every call provokes a reply. Early morning is the most active time for spring displays. It seems peaceful enough down on the fjord by the airport, but it's noisy here too, as the eider drakes display communally to their ducks out on the water. Their life's quite different, though just as competitive, with sometimes several drakes courting each duck. The willow grouse's life is centred on the territory. They're now paired off, and each cockbird has one overriding instinct to defend the territory in which his hen will nest, and where they will both feed from now on. And he soon makes his ownership of that territory clear. When crowing on the ground is not enough to deter his rival, then the display flight is used to add a new dimension to his threats. And it's answered in kind with an opposing song flight. Now the battle of threats reaches its climax as both birds refuse to give way at the boundary between territories. It often ends with a dramatic show of strength, each cock challenging the other to cross the boundary, as they walk parallel to each other in full battle order along the invisible dividing line, with red wattles raised. It looks fierce, but it's really a display designed to avoid coming to blows, a war of threats and postures, both on the ground and in the air, while the hen seems oblivious to all the fuss. The redwing's song heralds the first mild days of spring as the hooded crows display with a courtship chase through the trees. By late April, the first nest is built, and early magpies, and the common gulls begin to move into their marshland nesting colony. The Arctic summer's so short that there's already a sense of urgency. It's time for pairing and courtship. And to study this in the willow grouse in more peace than Tromsø Island offers, we move even further north to another island where shooting is banned, Karlsoy, on latitude 70 degrees north. We plan to stay on Karlsoy in the 100-year-old house used by the research workers from the Arctic Biology Department of Tromsø University. We're welcomed by the eiders, now paired off along the shore, and we get our first spectacular view from the harbour across the Lyngenfjord to the mountains which are a constant inspiration from our windows. The magic lasts from the eastern light of early morning through to the sunlight on the western slopes at dusk. This is the sort of place where any day you might see a white-tailed sea eagle flying over. And it's home for about 50 people in one small community on the east shore. There's a wooden church, little used, a tiny school with 1 teacher and 4 pupils, and in the big white house at Prestegård, a commune with a successful pop group. For all its remoteness, Karlsoy has new houses and goat farms. It has most modern conveniences, but no traffic, no police, and no pub. But it has thousands of acres of woodland and 250 pairs of willow grouse, which share the woods with a returning population of migrants like the field pairs. And residents like the snipe, which have already chosen their territory down in the marsh, where one bird stands guard while her mate performs his unique drumming flight overhead. Spreading his outer tail feathers to vibrate noisily in the slipstream of his headlong power dives. On Karlsoy, like many other northern islands, the grouse have no high ground to move back to for nesting, so they stay in the birch woods, which are now full of the sounds of battle as the pairs prepare for courtship. In fact, quite soon, we find a cockbird running with tail raised and wings drooped, displaying not against a rival but to his mate. And the best time to watch is in the quiet of early morning down in the marsh, where one pair of birds, now beginning to molt into their brown summer plumage, is well established in its territory. The cock attends closely on his mate, who feeds vigorously, storing up energy for her eggs. He's constantly on the point of courtship, but not till the hen performs her head-bobbing invitation display does he start to spread his tail, the first stage of his full courtship dance. And what a wonderful performance, to which, as so often, the hen seems to pay scant attention. Lapwings make spring music, both with their peewit calls and their wings. Like the grouse, they're ground-nesting birds, and as the spring melt gets underway, it's still far too wet for egg-laying yet. So this is a waiting time, full of the sounds of courtship. The birchwoods are waiting too, but all is not spring sweetness. Overhead, the shadow of the falcon is a reminder of the harsher side of spring. Near the north shore, Ingvar, on a day out from school, comes across the plucking post of a gyrfalcon and the remains of one grouse that will not nest this summer. Those conspicuous black tail feathers have a vital role to play in courtship, but can be a fatal giveaway to the hunter in the sky. It's May now, and the thick sheet of ice on the marsh is beginning to melt and flow steadily to the sea, where on the north shore, in the still chilly air, the purple saxifrage bursts into bloom, the first hint of the Arctic summer to come. Six weeks later, it's still cold. But along the shore west of the village, the first young birds of the year are already on the wing, the raucous ravens. As predators, they've timed it well, laying their eggs in mid-April in a bulky stick nest under a cliff overhang decorated with roseroot. So that now, when the grouse are still sitting on eggs, the young ravens are all perched along the cliff edge. Soon, there will be a rich harvest for them of eggs and young birds. But now they concentrate on learning to fly, surprisingly well for a first effort. By mid-June, the cliff-top grass glows with a rich tapestry of colours, wild pansies and lichens, and green cushions of moss campion, decorated with clusters of pink stars. The wheatears were amongst the earliest migrants to arrive from the far south, and are now the first of the small birds to hatch out their young in time for the first hatch of insects. And once it's warm enough for insects as food, then the violets and the rock roses can display their coloured lures for the insects as pollinators. Some birds, too, are designed to catch the eye, like the oyster catchers, who make full use of their showy plumage to distract our attention away from their subtly concealed eggs amongst the pebbles. Under the early yellow leaves in the birchwood, it's a different game, more like hide and seek. Here, for the ground nesting birds, camouflage is the first secret of survival. The grouse's eggs are cryptically coloured, and she has white plumage only on her underside and her wings, which she never uses in summer unless she has to. And in the safety of her nest, hidden under a pile of brushwood, she does have to use them, to tuck her precious eggs under the insulation of her feathers. The air temperature is still only 5 or 6 degrees centigrade. Further up the hill, on a steep bank amongst the blaeberry, the redwing's eggs glisten blue, in a nest which provides far better heat insulation and is so well hidden that camouflaged shell colour has never evolved, the bird herself providing the camouflage. Now we see the point of that disruptive pattern of white lines and eye stripes on a redwing's head, just as effective as the subtle markings on the back of the snipe, another ground nester like the grouse, amongst the dappled shadows of the birchwood floor. Only the hen grouse incubates, a long drag of 22 days. But there's more to it than just keeping all those eggs at a constant minimum of 36 degrees centigrade. Every few hours, all the eggs must be turned. This prevents the yolks from sticking to the shells. It's a response by the hen to a stimulus produced by the warm eggs on the brood patches on her underside. 2 meters up in a birch tree, another nest builder, the noisy fieldfare, already has half-fledged young. Both parents bring food and carry away the droppings to keep the nest clean. A diet of worms rapidly converts the naked young into little downy eating machines, safe in a mud-lined nursery but still needing the warmth from a brooding parent. So the birchwood lives and nurtures life in the short, sweet Arctic summer, but shows all the evidence of the long winter past, in limbs and trunks crippled by the weight of winter snow. Well into June, the cold has lingered, until suddenly the wind drops, the skies clear, and real warmth comes to the green acres of Karlsoy's birchwoods. The mountains on neighbouring Vanoy remind us that we are over 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle. But when the wind off that snow drops, a sudden heat wave hits Karlsoy. And in a few brief days, the birches turn from yellow to fresh green, and a cock brambling sings in a temperature of nearly 30 degrees centigrade at midday. His monotonous wheeze must be one of the least attractive songs known, and the hen's version is exactly the same. But where her colouring is typically muted, his is the self-advertising, jazzy black and white pattern of the territory holder, who cares nothing for camouflage and sings to deter his rivals. So what is the function of the song of the hen? It seems to attract her mate, who flies up and makes a pass at her as she wing shivers at him on a favourite perch near the nest. But while he continues to show off, she has a last-minute feed before returning to her neat nest in the fork of an alder tree. While he goes foraging for food for them both. And then there are the tiny redpolls, the smallest of the fork-tailed finches in these northern birchwoods. The stubby bill is typical of all seed-eating birds, and it's a crop full of seeds that the decorative cock redpoll brings back to satisfy the wing-quivering hunger of his broody little hen. Wherever the sun brings growth and increase in nature, someone's there to tap the energy bank for food, or profit. Even here on remote Karlsoy, as everywhere else, man tends to raid that energy bank with scant regard for the long-term consequences. There is plenty of summer forage for the goats now, though they're cropping this fragile food supply at an alarming rate. But each year sees more and more browsing animals, with free access to almost the whole island. And up above the village, there are new roads and new buildings to house yet more goats over the winter. The most risky part of such a development is the attempt to drain the peat bog in the main valley and improve the marshland. It may work, but Arctic bogland is notoriously fragile and slow to recover from such drastic treatment, with so many months of permanent frost every year. So it remains to be seen whether this plan will produce better feeding and enable the islanders to sustain a higher population of farm animals as a viable ecosystem. Meanwhile, the old order survives alongside the new, and birds like the whimbrel feed and nest mostly on the undrained marsh to the north. With no ground predators like foxes or stoats on Karlsoy, it's ideal for ground nesting birds, like the northern golden plover, handsome with their white-bordered black waistcoats. And living on a tundra bright with flowers, like the yellow mountain violet, fjällfjoll. And the pure white blossoms of alpine butterwort, fjälltättegräs. And everywhere on this tussocky bog, probably unchanged since the last ice age, is dwarf birch, Betula nana, tree cover less than a metre high. Redshanks with young are hysterical. The common gulls are also nesting in the marsh and also have young, but the redshanks always behave as though nobody else has a right to exist, let alone dare to have young of their own to look after. So every move of the gulls is treated as an assault and provokes violent attack from the redshanks, and that never-ending bleating alarm call. You wonder where they get the energy in the hot midday sun, which brings out the bog flowers in profusion. And the bikinis. Yes, it's school holidays now, and there are a few visitors to the island, and in the heat wave, the bathing beach at the north shore is popular with the children from the village. Though earlier in the season, the wildlife of the birchwoods is completely undisturbed by man. So, although nesting only yards from the path to the beach, the hooded crows have managed to rear 3 young in a clump of taller birch trees. Now, Karlsoy has proved an excellent place for scientific research, for instance on the effect of the crows on the grouse as predators, mostly of their eggs. The research has been carried out by the Arctic Biology Department of Tromsø University, and now there's a new sound on Karlsoy, the rhythmic pulsing of a grouse's heartbeat, transmitted by a tiny radio transmitter on the bird's back. And to explain how this can be recorded, to give us a new understanding of these remarkable birds, is Geir Gabrielsen of Tromsø University.
100 meters from this observation place, we have a hen sitting on her eggs. This hen is outfitted with a heart rate transmitter, which we receive the signals through this antenna. This antenna is connected to a radio, and we can adjust the frequency here. From this radio, we are connected to a tape recorder, in which we can record the heart rate signal through a tape cassette. In connection to this recording of heart rate, we can put on the observation we made through the telescope, and we can say what is happening in the nest.
The tiny radio on the sitting hen's back is sending out pulses recording a heart rate of about 140 beats per minute, the resting rate. Unseen by her, a raven flies over and calls. The hen tries to locate the danger by raising her head. Her heartbeat slows. This is known as the orienting response, an attempt to locate anything she finds alarming. But where our heart rate would increase, hers slows down until the danger passes, and she gradually returns to the normal resting rate. Now listen to how it increases noticeably when her own mate song flights into the territory. Interestingly, the call of a strange cock produces no such heart flutter. She's apparently faithful, emotionally, to her mate. But much more remarkable is what the scientists call the freezing response, as a result of a provocation. Earlier in the season at the study nest under the brushwood, this was tested by sending out an assistant to approach on foot. Listen to the dramatic effect on the bird's heart rate. When a person, equivalent to a predator, approaches close to the sitting hen, her heart rate can drop as low as 20 beats per minute. She freezes on the nest in a kind of suspended animation, slows down her breathing, and so reduces her scent. But listen to what happens when she does fly off. Her heart rate leaps from 20 to 500 beats per minute in just 1 second. It makes you wonder how many other ground nesters, like the snipe for instance, might have developed this incredible trick of the grouse to escape detection from ground predators by reducing that fatal giveaway, their scent. This nest has been studied since egg laying and is due to hatch within 48 hours. She started sitting with the 10th egg out of 11, so that they will all hatch within about 12 hours, provided she's kept up the temperature without too long a break for the whole of the 22 days. So she's meticulous about settling her eggs under her brood patches, where a special blood supply keeps them warm against her skin. But she has to leave to feed, though at this late stage she leaves less often and for shorter periods. All her arrivals and departures are being recorded, and sometimes her return is delayed, especially if there's an egg thief like a greater black-backed gull in the area. This time her return is held up for 20 minutes as the gull searches for a meal. It's late in the day and getting chilly. The eggs will be very cool.
The hen is now walking toward the nest after being away for 20 minutes. It is now approaching the nest.
She seems in a hurry to get back. Her heart rate is now 240 beats per minute, normal for most activity. But as she shuffles down onto those cooled eggs, a remarkable thing happens, the brooding response. Her heartbeat accelerates rapidly to a steady 8 beats per second, 500 beats a minute. It's as though she was able to switch on an automatic heat pump to push more blood through the fatty cells of her brood patches. By checking her temperature, Geir Gabrielsen has recorded a marked increase in efficiency in reheating those cooled eggs after the brooding response. When you're studying grouse as intensively as this, you do come across all sorts of surprises. It's not unknown for a cock willow grouse to have two hens in his territory with separate nests, but it's almost unheard of for both wives to share the same one. Today, 22 eggs are hatching into 22 chicks, with two very worried mothers, one much tamer than the other. The calling of the chicks is a powerful draw to a hen grouse, so that even the shyer of the two birds soon comes back on at this crucial stage. And we have the previously unrecorded situation of two hens brooding a joint family side by side. The freezing response is even more marked once the grouse leave the nest. A hen and her chicks will crouch motionless on the approach of danger until the last possible moment. Grouse perform all sorts of distraction displays in defence of their young, and when these do not succeed in distracting us, they're remarkably bold, especially when the young are calling. All through the breeding season, the cock will try to divert any intruder into his territory away from the nest, or now away from the chicks, running quite openly in a wide circle, showing much more white than the hen. The effect on a dog is usually irresistible. Now, if the young have been accidentally scattered, it's best to try to leave as many as possible in one place, though the adults will come very close if they hear the chicks cheeping. Within minutes of our departure, the whole family are not only gathered together by the calls of the adult, but they merge invisibly into the background of the birchwood. Grouse take their active young to the food. Most small birds, like the red pearls, have to bring the food to the young, which are helpless and confined to the snug feather-lined nest, as is the hen too, by her need to keep them warm and protected. So the cock brings food for the whole family, not insects, which most small birds feed to their young, but seeds. Seeds have a lower food value than insects, and they need vast quantities. He needs his time for food gathering, not feeding half a dozen individual beaks, so the technique they use is a masterpiece of productivity. The hen takes the lot in double quick time. He can go off to collect more, and the young in the nest eventually get a second-hand meal. This system not only saves time and energy, but means that the young are never left unprotected, and while the cock's looking for more food, she can clean up the nest after the meal. At the redwing's nest, it's hatch day. In some ways, it's just like the grouse. The hatching of all the eggs is synchronized, and the chicks tap their way out from inside using a tiny egg tooth on the tip of the bill. But everything else about these nest-building birds is different. At first, tiny items of food are brought, and the young are just strong enough to raise a wobbly head and open a bright yellow gape. That and their constant squeaking are compelling stimuli to the parents to feed them. The care of the young by the willow grouse is different, but no less attentive. For at least a day now, the hen grouse has been talking to her eggs. The chicks call from inside the shell, and this stimulates both the cock on guard nearby and the hen on the nest to a new excitement. Now the first chicks are out, and the contact calling is a two-way conversation. Once all the chicks are hatched out, the hen will only leave the nest once or twice more before leaving for good. She can only go a very short distance for a rapid bout of feeding, where she deliberately stops calling so that the chicks stay in the nest or nearby. Then, as she returns, she calls her chicks onto the nest, where she must still brood them till they're all completely dry. And they respond to her purring notes, specially used just for this purpose. Only a few hours later, the chicks are already dry, well covered with fluffy down, eyes open, and able to walk and feed, though they do not need food for the first day. The contrast with the newly hatched redwings could hardly be greater. The final stage at the nest is crucial. She must call continuously to keep the chicks close, but not so loud as to attract a predator. Discovery now would mean that all was lost. Other birds use different techniques to care for their young. A snipe has a maximum of 4 eggs and tends to trust in distance and spacing, often dispersing her young singly where they depend, as she does, on their superb camouflage to hide them. A leaf and a clump of moss, the bright eye and the surprisingly short beak give it away, but never movement. The strong freezing instinct in young snipe is their secret of survival. Fieldfares seem to ignore the hiding game and trust to the security of being high up in a tree. The noise the parents make seems to draw attention to the nest. But when a crow calls, the young still freeze. Hooded crows are probably the most serious predators of young thrushes late in the season, as they were of grouse eggs earlier. But most of the young eventually leave the nest with a bit of encouragement from their parents. Away from the protection of their aggressive parents at the nest, they're easily picked off by crows and ravens, and once they can fly, possibly by falcons as well. For the young peregrine also has a right to survive. Sadly, the peregrine falcon is now one of Norway's rarest breeding birds, its numbers reduced to a handful of pairs by pesticide pollution in the 50s and 60s. Their prey, largely grouse and hooded crows, or, as at this nest, the occasional young fieldfare for the hungry eyas. Hungry and impatient too. Mountain avens on an Arctic shoreline. Karlsoy is one of those rare places, reasonably accessible but truly natural, where the struggle for survival can be understood more vividly. It's the right sort of place, surely, to find that ultra-long-distance migrant, the Arctic tern. Its long wings and tail streamers give it a dancing, dainty flight. They're late nesters, for they've flown some 12,000 miles from the Antarctic, where they spend our winter, in order to nest here. The Karlsoy goats are a new hazard, for they often come down to the shore where the tern's eggs are so vulnerable. But this is a minor factor in the survival stakes of a species which has flown halfway round the globe and back, and now must fit its complete cycle of display, egg-laying, incubation and fledging into the few short weeks of an Arctic summer. The terns have a hectic schedule. There's one danger. The grouse especially are spared this year on Karlsoy. The golden eagle, which usually nests on a north-facing cliff near the tern colony, has lost her mate and only pays the occasional visit to the eyrie on the cliff face, which this year is deserted and overgrown. Eagle and willow grouse, predator and prey, willow warbler and mosquitoes. It's the same story on a different scale. And one of the most memorable sounds of the Arctic is the hum of mosquitoes, a harvest of insect life that small birds thrive on. Midges can be a real nuisance to the field worker and the cameraman, but for wildlife, they're part of the pattern of survival. Insects are the first link in many food chains. Small birds like meadow pipits rear their families on this superabundance of food. And young willow grouse chicks are known to need a fair proportion of insects in their diet. This is the climax of the year for our pair of grouse. She's leaving the nest for the last time after 24 dangerous days tied to the one spot, with all 11 chicks already active and able to find insects for themselves, following her calls like her special warning note against crows. Like all wild creatures, they must learn the language of survival. The cock is never far away, alert to any danger. This is the payoff for all that aggression. The territory, so stoutly defended in spring, is now rich in food plants and insects. And this is the endless day of the midnight sun, when at 10, 11 o'clock, the sun still lights up the cotton grass and dips behind the hill, but never below the horizon. The life of the willow grouse, like all life on Earth, derives from the energy of the sun. In the summer of the midnight sun, their environment is ideally suited to them. It is also very beautiful. Man, Homo sapiens, the thinking animal, has a unique appreciation of that beauty. And so we have also a unique responsibility, for only we can understand the patterns of nature, see the relationships between living things, predators and prey, hunters and hunted. Through science, we can unlock new secrets of the wildlife we study. And we can see the willow grouse as a miracle of intricate patterns of behavior and instincts more complex than we ever imagined, or just as a beautiful bird in a beautiful place, or... But we must leave the hunters and sportsmen to make up their own minds.